Welcome back, Careblazer. I'm so excited to have you here today. In this video, I'm talking to Lauren Dykovitz. You might remember her from a while back. I interviewed her. She is the daughter of a mother who passed away with early onset Alzheimer's. In today's video, she opens up her heart and shares some of the most difficult parts of being involved and caring for her mom with Alzheimer's disease. There were several things that really stood out to me in this video that I think will be incredibly helpful for many of you. Number one, she talked about how her father was really hesitant to allow help in the home when her mom needed more help. She talks about how they approached that with her father. She talks about how the first attempt at getting somebody in the home did not go well and that caregiver did not work out. And then she talks about what her family did differently to make sure that the next caregiver who came in the home to help had a lot more success. I think it's an amazing description of what every family should consider doing if they're thinking about getting help in the home. So if you are in the position of trying to get help in the home, but your loved one is not agreeable to it, then you definitely don't want to miss that part of the interview. And then the most heartwarming, heart-touching, emotional part of the interview is towards the end when Lauren talks about how she's been doing since her mom passed almost a year ago. It'll be a year from when this video goes live, but she's about a month shy at the time we recorded it. And she talks about her perspective and how she views life and going through life without her mom any longer. And I think it would be my wish for all of you to borrow her perspective and apply it to your life whenever you get to the point that your loved one passes away. And in her words, she said it felt like a big gaping hole left in her life. And I hope that you will find some healing in how she's approached this stage of life after caregiving. Careblazer, I'm going to link to all of her stuff in the description below. And I hope you find this interview as moving, as inspiring, and as educational as I did in hearing her talk. All right, I'm not going to take up any more of your time. Let's get to Lauren. Lauren, thank you so much for coming back on the channel and talking to my Careblazers again. They really enjoyed your first interview where you talked about the adjustment, learning about your mom's diagnosis, noticing the initial signs and symptoms. And so I really wanted to have you back because I wanted to focus more on the second half of caregiving, just kind of how things progressed, what were some of the unique challenges that you went through, and that's like second half of the caregiving journey, as well as how you've been doing since she's passed, because I think it's been about a year now, since your mom passed?
It'll be a year on April 4th.
Wow. So that is coming up around the corner. Yeah. So just in case my Careblazers haven't met you yet, or for some reason haven't watched the first interview with you, which I will link below, so you can watch it below in the description, Careblazer, or you can click on that link. Can you just give a brief introduction about your situation, about your mom and your story?
Sure. My name's Lauren Dykovitz. My mom, Jerry, was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's when she was 62 years old, and I was 25 years old at the time. That was back in July of 2010. And as I said, she just passed away April of 2020. I was a caregiver off and on, just part-time, for several years during the time that she had the disease. And during that time, I decided to start sharing my story through my blog, which I created. It's called Life, Love, and Alzheimer's. And I started an Instagram and a Facebook as well called Life, Love, and Alzheimer's. And then I wrote a memoir called Learning to Weather the Storm. And that told basically the first half of the journey with my mom's disease. And basically just started sharing my story so that other young women who had a parent that were diagnosed with a disease didn't feel so alone, because that's how I felt when my mom was first diagnosed. So I just sort of share the stories and experiences that I had and thoughts and feelings, and just kind of how I went through everything and how I got through it all. So,
yeah, it's always so interesting to me. You mentioned you wanted to tell your story so that other young women wouldn't feel so alone if they had a parent who was diagnosed. And I find that, there are millions of people with this disease out there, which means there's even more people out there who are impacted by that disease, like their family members. And for a disease that impacts so many, it's amazing how many people feel alone, whether you're a child with a parent who has some type of dementia, or you're a spouse or any other family member. This really is a disease where people feel so alone, despite so many people having it. So I think it's wonderful that you're sharing your story. And it definitely seems like writing is therapeutic for you in some way.
It definitely is. I think I've kind of always been a writer. I just didn't write for a while. And then I just kind of had this big thing to write about. And it just felt like the right thing to do. And it helps me just as much as hopefully it helps other people to just get it out there and process my thoughts and feelings and to get it out there. And then I always have other people who say that they can relate. And it's like I'm inside their brain, like putting out their thoughts and feelings. And I think to touch on the part that you said about feeling alone, I think a lot of us are geographically alone. I didn't know any other 25-year-old women who had a parent that was diagnosed in somebody in person that I knew in real life. But once I started sharing my story on the internet, it was like, whoa, like there's so many out there, and you just might not know somebody in your real life, but there are other people out there in the world that are going through it. And the one good thing about social media and blogging and everything is that it does bring us all together in a community. So
yeah, I'm curious, when your mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, did you let other people in your life, like outside of family, would you say other people who knew you, whether they were like coworkers or neighbors or acquaintances or friends, did they know that was going on?
Yeah. No, I didn't tell anybody.
Right. That's
I
just it. So it's like
I shut down. I think like a day or two after the diagnosis, obviously my fiance, who's now my husband at the time, he knew. He was very much along through the whole process and everything. Immediate family. I didn't even talk to aunts, uncles, cousins about it. I did call my best friend at the time, like maybe 2 days after the diagnosis, and I told her, and she said, "Oh, my grandmother had Alzheimer's before she passed." And I was just kind of like, "Well, that's your grandmother though." And she was a lot older than my mom is, and that's not the same experience. I get that it can be for some people who maybe have a closer relationship with a grandparent who has raised them and been like a mother or father figure to them. But in her situation, that was not the case. And I felt like she doesn't know what I'm going through. She can't relate to what I'm going through. Okay, no one my age is going to understand what I'm going through. So I'm just not going to talk about it because it makes me uncomfortable, and I'm worried about making other people uncomfortable, and no one knows what to say. So I'm just not going to talk about it. And I had another good friend of mine who I didn't even tell for a year, I think. And I finally told her. And then I think it was about 3 years into the diagnosis, I made the decision to quit my full-time job. And it was around that time that I started sort of more publicly sharing my story. And a lot of people that I knew personally, coworkers and things, were hearing it for the first time when I started sharing publicly. It's just one of those things that people don't know how to deal with it, and they don't know what to say. And there is a lot of shame and embarrassment and just hush hush about it, that you don't want to talk about it, and people don't have experience with it. And so it just kind of creates this whole stigma that it makes you not want to talk about it. But once I did start talking about it and sharing publicly, and there were so many people that I found who were affected by it that I had no idea. And then it made me feel better to share my story and connect with even more people. And even to this day, I have several, former coworkers and people that I knew back then who reach out to me all the time and say, now my mom is experiencing it, or now this, and they come to me for the advice because I'm the only person they know that's talking about it.
Right.
So I think it's important to share that, all the parts of the story, as long as whatever you're comfortable with. But I think it's so important, because if nobody talks about this stuff, then we're all just going to be in our own homes, in our own lives, just feeling completely isolated and alone, when that's just not the case.
Right. Absolutely. You mentioned something. You said people don't really know what to say. Like when you started to tell people, they didn't really know what to say, or was a little bit uncomfortable. Can you share what were some of the most thoughtful or warming things that people could say to you as you were going through that, like when they first learned, and maybe some of the things that were not so helpful?
I think a lot of people, the parts that were not so helpful are people who are sort of like denying it, that they're saying like, no, your mom's just getting older, or that's just like, that's what happens when you get older. She doesn't have Alzheimer's. Like, meanwhile, yes, she most definitely does. And how would you know better than her doctor? But I think that comes with, people are just trying to make it better for you. And they feel like if they're saying that, then it's comforting to you in a way that it's making it better. Do not say to someone, at least she's still alive. Don't say that, because it depends obviously on what stage your loved one is in the disease. When it's earlier on, it's not that bad. But when you have a parent who doesn't know who you are, they can't talk to you, have a conversation with you, they don't know the names of your children, they don't know what you do for a living, they don't know who your husband is, and they can't walk on their own anymore, they can't use the bathroom without help, they don't know how to do anything for themselves, really. The last thing that anyone wants to hear is, oh, well, at least she's still alive, because then it makes it seem like, oh, okay, well, everything that we are going through, everything that is happening to my mom is okay because she's still alive, and I should just be grateful and shut up about it.
Right.
So that is probably the worst thing that you could say to someone who's experiencing the disease. I think the best things that people can say is just, I'm sorry you're going through this. I'm here for you. Maybe I have not experienced it and I don't know what it's like, but I'm here to just listen and be support for you and help in any way that I can, even though, I'm admitting that I don't know what it's like, but I can still be there for you as a friend and support you through what you're going through. So yeah, I think that's probably really all you can say to someone.
That's good. So tell us a little bit about now this second half of caregiving and how that's really differed from the first part of caregiving. Like, I understand you're working on a new book and it's really focusing on the second half, the second chapter, I suppose, of caregiving. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I'm writing I sort of say it's the second half of my story, where it kind of picks up from where my first book left off, and just sharing from there until the end, and how things kind of progressed and how we dealt with it, myself personally and as a family. Where in the beginning of my book, in my first book, I talk about the beginning of the journey and the symptoms that we noticed with my mom and how we led to a diagnosis, and more sort of coming to an acceptance of the disease, and knowing that while I can't change what's happening to my mom, I can be there for her and I can give her a better quality of life. So my second book picks up from there, and I talk more about when I sort of took on a bigger caregiving role, still very part-time, but just much more involved. And I did that for a full year. And at the end of the year, I sort of reached a breaking point. My mom was getting worse. She needed more care that I wasn't necessarily comfortable giving her. I lost myself in caring for her. And there was a moment where we were planning a Christmas Eve party at my mom and dad's house. It was going to be like the last year that we would be able to have this party at their house. And it was the day before the party, and I was there helping to clean and set up, and my mom was having a bad day, and we were too loud, and she was yelling at us, kicking everyone out of the house. And I just went outside and I stood at the end of their driveway and I just sobbed, crying. And it was an ugly cry, like, oh, and I just said, I can't do this anymore. I just can't do this anymore. I've lost myself. I don't even know who I am anymore. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. I had, at the time, I had written and edited my first book, and it was just sitting on my computer, and I wasn't doing anything with it. I wasn't doing anything with my life or for myself. And it was kind of the moment where I said, I need help. We need help. I can't keep doing this anymore. And so that sort of led to a talk with my husband and a talk with my sister and her husband. And I came to the realization, like, oh, they don't expect me to do this all on my own, which I thought they did. I thought everyone thought this is just what Lauren wants to do. And why shouldn't she? She's not working. She should be doing this. This is her obligation. And they were fine to just sit back and let me do it. And that was not true at all. That was the story I was telling myself, and a pressure and an obligation that I was putting on myself to do all of this and to be everything for everyone and to not ask or accept help. And through talking with them, I sort of realized that they all kind of felt like the same way that I did, where, Lauren shouldn't be doing all of this. She should have a job. She should have a life. She should be doing everything that all the rest of us are doing. And I was shocked that they felt that way. I just had always felt like it was something that I had to do. And so we talked amongst ourselves, because my dad did not want help. My dad wanted me to help because I'm the daughter. My mom knows me. I'm not a stranger, and he didn't want outside help. He was very resistant to it. He was very worried that my mom wasn't going to accept it. And he didn't want to put her in a facility either. So we felt like, well, he's never going to agree to put her in a memory care facility, but we need help in the home to make this work and to make this happen. And so in this next book, I talk about the months-long process of getting that help. And it involved several, meetings with our family, just us, and then sort of like intervention type meetings with my dad, and pretty much not giving him another option. I just completely stepped back and stopped helping out, which was the hardest thing that I've probably ever done, and just kind of left my dad to somewhat fend for himself. I mean, I still would be there if absolutely needed, but it was something we needed to do as a family to make him realize that we needed help outside of us. And that led to hiring in-home caregivers. The first one didn't work out, but the second one was like a huge blessing. And I call her Saint Sheila, because she was like just amazing. And her and my mom had this bond, and she was my mom's caregiver until the end.
How long of the time was it between you stepping back and not helping as much as you were, from your dad realizing, okay, I can't do this all on my own. We need some more help?
Well, at the same time as that I stepped back, we started sort of having these, like I said, intervention type meetings where I would invite my dad to my house, and then he would show up, and like we would all be there. And we would talk to him about it. We did that 2 or 3 times.
How did he respond to those meetings?
Not great. He was mad at us. He didn't leave, which I was surprised. I fully expected him to walk out and leave. But he was very, very resistant to it, very upset, mad that we were sort of all talking behind his back. And, but even to have these meetings, it was near impossible because we couldn't do it at my parents' house while my mom was there. So we had to have one family member who could stay at the house with my mom so that my dad could leave to come to my house where all the rest of us were. And we only had about an hour or so before he would have to get back to the house. And that in itself was a problem, because if none of us are available, then who's going to be there to watch her or to take care of her? And then sort of one of those meetings, we had a representative from a care agency come. And my dad was just dragging his feet at getting anything started. But eventually he did, and we, pretty much forced him to do it. But the overall time frame was 2 to 3 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned the first worker didn't work out. Can you talk a little bit about, number one, was your mom receptive to the new person coming in the home? And why didn't that person work out?
My mom was not receptive to it, which was my dad's fear, and it was exactly how it played out. She was suspicious. She was at the point where she was always listening, but she couldn't communicate, and she couldn't have she could speak, but she couldn't have a conversation. And she was just always listening, and she was always suspicious of who these people are and what are they talking about and things like that. She did not think she needed help with anything, although she could not take herself to the bathroom. She started needing help to wipe herself after using the bathroom. She wasn't showering, washing her hair. She needed help walking. She needed someone to make her meals for her, all of those things. But when even with someone she knew, such as myself, she didn't want me to help her with any of those things. So when a person that she didn't know came in and wanted to help her with those things, she didn't want anybody to do any of those things for her. And so she would yell at her. She would tell her to get out of her house. She would just sit and look at her with a mean, look, kind of glaring at her. And we introduced this woman as a housekeeper, because we told my mom, your house isn't dirty, but wouldn't it be so great to have someone to clean your house for you? I wish I had a housekeeper. I wish I had somebody to do that. And then maybe you guys will become friends and you could have lunch together. And because there was no way we could say, hey, mom, here's some lady that's going to take care of you and wipe your behind for you. Right. And you don't know her, but here she is. So have fun. So you have to be creative and come up with sort of ways like that. And that's what we decided. And my mom was smart enough with it enough to know that didn't make sense, because she would ask her, why aren't you cleaning? And when she would sit with her and she was offering companion care. And my mom would say, well, why aren't you cleaning? You should be cleaning. You're not doing anything. What are you doing? What are you getting paid to do? Just sit here. Mm-hmm. And so, and I think it all matters in not what my mom is saying or doing, but how the person responds to what my mom is saying and doing. Yes. And this woman didn't respond well. She largely ignored my mom and just, I think she just wanted to collect a paycheck. She was a very sweet woman about my mom's age, but she wasn't really motivated or energetic or anything like that. And my mom would say things like that, and she would just ignore her. And she would just sit there and look at her phone or watch whatever they had on TV. And my mom, didn't react well to that, because then she would feel like she was being ignored. And she would call out for my dad all the time. And the woman would just let her do it. And my mom started getting louder and louder and louder. And this woman would just ignore her. And once she left for the day, my dad paid for it all night long, because my mom was very agitated. She would follow my dad around, asking him, where have you been all day? You don't care about me. You're out with your girlfriend, all these sorts of things, which was very hard for my dad to deal with. Right. And then she wasn't sleeping at night, and she would wake up in the middle of the night and screaming and yelling, and that, the house is on fire, and just all these sorts of things that the only explanation that I can say is because she was so agitated during the day, and she wasn't getting the stimulation that she needed, and she was agitated, and it all just carried through the night. And that led to a lot of problems with that.
So how did you introduce the second helper into the home, especially considering that the first one didn't work out?
We met her first, which I think is important. We did not meet the first person first. They told us that they had the perfect person in mind and she'll be great and blah, blah, blah. And she showed up. So the day that my mom met her was the day that my dad and I met her. And we knew we had to make a change, and we talked to my dad about making a change. And so we called the care agency and told them we wanted to try a different person, which they had said a lot of people do. That's fine. We can figure it out. And we said, we want to meet her first. So my dad and my sister and I met her at my house, and I could tell right away that she was totally different, because she was like playing with my dogs, and she was like just warm and friendly and just seemed like she cared a lot. And so we said, okay, this is good. We'll try her out. And right away, it was just a huge difference. My mom wasn't behaving any differently, but this caregiver was responding in a totally different way that was more caring and nurturing, receptive. She would sit and watch TV, but she would include my mom in what she was watching. Just more of a friend. Like, I think my mom just thought she was her friend.
Right. Yeah. And I'm sure like that got to be a better and better relationship the more that caregiver came in and continued to foster the relationship. So even in the beginning, if your mom's like, why are you here again? Why are you just sitting there? Because of the way that person, Saint Sheila, responded, it built a relationship. That's so great.
Yeah. And because at first, the caregiver was not bathing my mom. She was not doing most of the hygiene stuff. She was pretty much offering companion care, making meals and things like that. But as they bonded and my mom got to trust her and know her, then we added in. And it was a lot of my dad resisting that too, not wanting a stranger to bathe my mom. But once we all got to know Sheila more and had more of a bond with her, and we all just grew together to know each other and feel comfortable with each other, then we started adding in a little bit at a time. I think people are so resistant to the outside help thing because they think that on day one, this person is going to come in, bathe your mom or dad, change them, take them to the bathroom, that's not the way it should go. It should be little bits at a time until everyone's comfortable. And then, I mean, it got to the point where, she could be with Sheila all day long and no one would worry. I mean, it was such a blessing in the end. And we're still in contact with Sheila now. So she really became like part of our family. So it can really be such a blessing and such a huge help, because it takes the pressure off of the family when it's so emotional for us to do those things. Yeah. And I think Sheila grew to the point where it was emotional for her too, but she's a professional caregiver. And so it was different in other ways. And it allowed me to be a daughter again, to be a daughter to my mom, but to also be a daughter to my dad, because I had become my dad's helper, and it really, in many ways, it put such a strain on our relationship. And there was a lot of resentment of, for me, just thinking that he expects me to do this and he doesn't get how hard this is for me. And he doesn't ever want to talk to me unless I'm coming over to help take care of my mom. But that was all we talked about, was my mom's care. And so I was able to be a daughter to both of my parents again. And my dad and I were able to go out to lunch together. And I don't know how long it had been since we were able to do that. Yeah. So it's definitely worth pursuing that and, going through the struggle of working things out, because in the end, it was a lifesaver, really.
Yes. So my wish would be for every Careblazer to have a Saint Sheila in their life. But I really want to point out a couple of things and like highlight, because I think it's so important and it's what you and your family did. So number one, you introduced the new help as like a housekeeper, something less intrusive or invasive, something more people would tend to be open to versus like, this is somebody to come help you because you can't be left alone or because you need help bathing. Like the way you introduced the person was such a wonderful way.
Oh,
I
good.
also am really totally like, I think this is a lot of people when they get to the point where they're willing to accept help or they finally open themselves up to that help, sometimes we miss some of these steps and it makes it that much harder for it to be successful. So number one, like the way you introduced is wonderful. The other thing I want to highlight is that sometimes you don't get the best fit on the first time around. So the first person you guys had, this is pretty common, is it didn't really work out. And it's so easy at that point for families, especially family members like your dad, who was already hesitant to the idea in the first place, to be willing to try again. So I love that you guys were realizing, okay, this possibly could be better with another person. Like, let's not give up entirely. Let's try again. That's great. And then I love that you guys met with the person first, because that gives you guys a chance to get to know the person, get comfortable with the person, let that person know a little bit about who they're going to start caring for. That's a wonderful opportunity too for the family members to say, this is what my mom really loves talking about. These were her hobbies. She really loves horses. You might want to bring it up. Oh, please avoid at all costs anything related to blank, that really sets her off. Like, we're so excited. Like, you get to set yourself up, give yourself more of a chance of success when you get to meet that person. And then you hit the nail on the head so good when you mentioned that first caregiver, professional caregiver, wasn't quite responding to your mom in the best way possible. So much about difficult dementia behaviors really has to do with how we respond to that behavior. We can either amp it up or we can really start to help reduce it and calm the person. And the first caregiver really amped it up, not only in the moment where she's starting to yell your dad's name even louder, but all through the night. And, your dad was hearing about it. She wasn't able to sleep. It's like this domino effect. And when you get a caregiver who's able to respond in a good way, and it's totally okay as the family member to give some tips to that caregiver if maybe they're not that well versed in dementia or difficult behaviors, to say, she might say this, or she, in the last caregiver, she would often say, why aren't you cleaning? Why aren't you doing this? And this was a really great way to respond. Or she got really triggered when you can give them all that information. So I think, and then the final thing that you guys did, which was so good, is that you didn't just start with, hey mom, here's the new person. She's going to take you to take a shower now. It's like, no, you can start with the house cleaning. You can start with watching TV. You can start with the new housekeeper saying, you know what, I'm hungry. Let's make a snack. How's a sandwich sound? I'll make one for you too. Like, it's just like a natural development. But absolutely, when you go from no care at all to like, let's have a stranger come in and do all these things, that's such a big jump that it's often unsuccessful. But when you do it the way your family did it, you can have such beautiful success. So kudos to you and your family, especially for staying with it after the first one didn't work out. So this is like amazing information you just shared.
Good. And I wanted to add also, I just thought about this, that we also did not start out with leaving my mom with the person all day. We started out because I had been in a caregiving role for about a year or so. We started out where my dad would leave me with the caregiver with my mom, and I would sit in and hang out and stuff. And then I would say, okay, I'm going to go upstairs and do something. And then I would go upstairs. I could still hear them and I could hear what was going on. And then I would pop back in and check in and things. And then maybe I would leave and I would text my dad and tell him, hey, I'm leaving now. And he would come home half an hour later. Yeah. And then we would increase that half an hour time. She would be left alone with the person for the half an hour. And then we would increase that time a little bit at a time until eventually she was with my mom was with the caregiver for an hour, 2 hours, and then the whole time. And that length of time that the caregiver was there increased. We started with I believe it was 3 hours, 3 days a week. And then it got to be, 4 hours, 3 days a week. And then it was 4 hours, 4 days a week. And then eventually we were blessed that we were able to have, so we had someone 7 days a week. Once my mom got put on Medicaid, which is a whole other part of the story, and I talk about that in my book as well, we were able to increase her hours, and she had someone 7 days a week. But you can't start with that, and you can't expect it to be, like you had said, going from nothing to everything. It doesn't work that way. And I am so grateful that my dad did allow us to try someone new, because I thought for sure if this first person doesn't work out, he's going to give up. He's going to say, see, I told you so. This doesn't work. We're not doing this. And then I would have felt obligated to continue my role as a caregiver, resenting him for making me do it and not accepting outside help. And he didn't do that. He stuck with it. And we said, I don't think it could get any worse than it is right now. So like, we might as well try somebody new and let's see how it goes. And I told him, the second person might not work out either. And this is just what we're going to have to go through till we find the right person. I just want to say too, that it's so much easier for me to say that because I did not live with my mom. I wasn't the one laying in bed with her at night when she was screaming in my ear, and yelling and agitated and upset all the time. So it's so much easier for me to say that than it was for my dad to go through that. But it definitely paid off in the end for everyone involved. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's such a great, important tip I want to highlight there, where you don't just like this new person comes in and then everybody leaves, right? It's kind of like, because then it's very apparent this person is there just to watch this person.
They know more than you think they know sometimes.
Right. And so it's like, oh, she's just here. The whole family gets to know her. The whole family gets to benefit from the housekeeping. The whole family gets to benefit from having this new friend in the home. So that's really great. I feel like that whole part is so helpful for anybody thinking about getting help in the home. That's going to be really helpful. So thank you so much for sharing your experience with that.
Sure.
Can you talk about, like, shifting gears a little bit, how it's been since your mom's passing? Like, it's been almost a year now. What have been some of the hard parts, the surprising parts, things you never would have thought you would have had to go through? Like, that's such a big adjustment from, having a mom with early onset Alzheimer's, being involved, visiting her, and then all of a sudden not having that mom around.
Yeah, I think that was probably the hardest part, and the biggest adjustment is just having this like gaping hole in your life all of a sudden. As I said, that we hired these caregivers for my mom, and their care increased over time, and I wasn't a caregiver anymore, but I was still the daughter visiting all the time. And especially towards the end, in the last few months, I would go visit my mom and kneel by her bedside for hours at a time, to the point that my legs would fall asleep and I hadn't eaten anything, or I didn't have anything to drink, because I just felt like just wanting to be with her. And I would sit there for hours holding her hand, and then she's gone and I can't do that anymore. And so it was like, well, what do I do with all of this time that I have now? I'm not, I wake up in the morning and I'm like, oh, I'm not driving to my parents' house today to sit next to my mom for 4 hours and hold her hand and listen to music. And nobody tells you that you miss that part. I'm going to get emotional. Mm-hmm. Nobody tells you that you miss the nobody tells you that you miss the saying goodbye part, the hard part, the hard days, the hard times when it was so hard taking care of my mom. And then when we had somebody else taking care of her, it was hard, just seeing her go through that, and just watching that happen to her, watching her slipping away, and just what our relationship became. And, it really does just come down to like two hands, holding hands, like wanting both to hold on forever and ever and ever, and also just wanting to let go and wanting her to not suffer anymore and to be at peace finally after this whole 10 years for my mom of suffering, but also not wanting my mom to be gone. And it's such complicated feelings, but nobody tells you that you're going to miss that part, that you're going to miss those hard days of just kneeling next to her bed until my legs fell asleep, until I was like starving because I hadn't eaten in hours. And I hadn't gone to the bathroom or had a drink because you don't want to miss anything. And nobody tells you that you miss that too. And when it's gone and you just kind of don't know what to do with yourself. And for me, it's been a transition of grief, because when my mom was living, I was grieving her, even though she was still alive. When someone has Alzheimer's, you start grieving, or dementia, you start grieving them the day they're diagnosed, as they start to slowly lose themselves and you lose more and more of them and you change. You grieve them, you grieve yourself, you grieve the life that you used to have. There's so much grief with that. And then when the person dies, now it's a more permanent grief and you're grieving just having a mom. And I miss a lot more of her, of who she was before she got sick. And I'm remembering a lot more of that woman who raised me and what she would be in my life now if she was still here and she was still healthy. Like, what would that look like? And what would our life be like? And how would our relationship be? And in many ways, my experience, the disease changed our relationship for the better, because I just felt like I got closer to my mom. And the worse that she got, and when she no longer knew who I was, I just felt so much closer to her, because you have to rely on a bond that doesn't speak words. It's a communication with the person that isn't said out loud. It's holding her hand and her knowing that I'm there, and knowing for sure, knowing that it's me, but not being able to say, that's my daughter, Lauren. Right. But she'd open her eyes when I would walk in the room or when she would hear my voice. And so we got so much closer, and I miss that so much, but I also am missing a lot more of who she was before she got sick. And just the permanence of this grief now, and knowing that although I missed my mom before and I was grieving her before, I could still drive to her house and sit next to her and hold her hand, but I can't even do that anymore.
Right.
And a lot of trying to figure out who I am, because I don't know, I don't know anymore. I would say I know a little bit better now than the day that my mom passed, but it's definitely a process of just trying to figure out. It's like, it's not returning to who I was before my mom got sick. It's becoming who I am now after having been through this experience and this trauma of losing a parent this way, and it changes you. And I'm just sort of trying to figure out who I am now and what do I want to do now and what's important to me, and how I want to move forward with my life in honoring my mom, and honoring myself and the experience that we went through as a family.
It reminds me of a quote I saw recently that says, you don't go through it, you grow through it. And you definitely seem to be in this growth process as you went through it and continue to go through it now.
Yeah, I definitely agree. In many ways, I felt like I lost myself to my mom's Alzheimer's, but I kind of look at it now and reframing it that I didn't lose myself. I was just becoming myself. I'm becoming like who I was always meant to be and doing the things that I was always meant to do. I just didn't know it at the time.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I imagine over the past year, there have been things that maybe your mom would have been involved in, or your mom would have been present for. And for the first time ever, she wasn't there. And that had to be a huge just shift. I imagine everything from Christmas to Thanksgiving to the birthdays to the anniversaries. It's like a constant, like she's physically gone, but she's still very present because she's alive in your memories. And in like your day to day as you go through these events?
Yeah, everyone's experience with that is different. My experience has been, I almost feel her more now at Christmas and Thanksgiving and things, because as most people, your listeners know, your loved one stops being able to participate in those things as the disease progresses. So there have been many Christmases and Thanksgivings and birthdays and things that my mom wasn't a part of for the last few years because she was no longer able to attend family gatherings or family parties and things. And there was no way that we could have it at my parents' house with my mom there because it was too much and overstimulation. She'd be agitated. And then the physical abilities of just not being able to walk and to, do all those things that come along with the disease, that the person can't participate in a lot of that stuff anymore. And so my dad never wanted to go anywhere without my mom. My dad didn't want to go to my niece's birthday party because my mom couldn't go to my niece's birthday party. But in the last couple of years, he did because he knew it was important and it was the right thing to do. But anytime that we would all get together without my mom, we were all just sitting there knowing that she's back at the house, like sitting in her chair, like just sitting there with somebody else there taking care of her. And it was such a guilt of being out and enjoying your life and your family and your time together without her being there, knowing that she was still physically in this world, but she's not there with you. And now I just feel like she's here, we're all getting together for Christmas and Thanksgiving and she's here. Like, I know she's here. I feel her and she's in each of us. And one thing that I say, and I have written about on my blog, is my mom's world got so small as her disease progressed. She went from being able to go everywhere and do everything to, well, she can't drive anymore. So she needs someone else to take her out. Well, now she can't even go to these places anymore. She can only go to a few places. Now she can't go anywhere. She can't leave the house. Well, now she can't leave the living room. Well, now she can't leave the bedroom in the hospital bed where she laid for months before she died. And her world got so small that it was just this teeny tiny little corner of one room in her house, in her neighborhood, in the state that she lived in. And now her world is everywhere. Yeah. She's everywhere now. She's in, the sky, she's in the trees, she's in the wind, the grass, the rain, the sun. She's in my heart. She's in my sister's and my niece's hearts. And, I say she can go everywhere with me. And she can also be everywhere with my sister and everywhere with my nieces and my dad. And she's a part of everything that we do because she's a part of each of us and she's with each of us. Yeah. And I find that I feel her with me so much. And the times that I miss her the most are just in those like ordinary moments, ordinary days, ordinary times. It's not holidays or birthdays. It's not anniversaries of her death. It's none of that. It's just in the way, the sun looks or the way, I'm drinking a cup of tea or I feel it a lot in taking care of my dad because he's had some health problems and I have been there to take care of him. And it really triggers my grief because it reminds me so much of when I was doing those things for my mom. And it also reminds me that she is not here to do these things for my dad, which is why I have to be here to do these things for him. And so that can be very triggering. It just reminds me of the loss and reminds me that she's not here to take care of him and she's not here to go through this with us and everything. And just sort of those like ordinary, like everyday life things that make me miss her.
Yeah, that is so beautiful. Just the perspective of my mom is with me everywhere now. Right before her death, she was confined to a bed in a corner of a room and just stayed, like her world was so small. Now her world is free and big and she's everywhere. And that is such a beautiful perspective. I think that I would hope other Careblazers can borrow from that approach. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's no matter what your beliefs about anything is, like, I just feel that it is what you make of it. And if you choose to believe that something is a sign from your loved one, then it's a sign from your loved one, whether that's true and logical or whatever, or not. If you believe that's what that is, then that's what it is. And if you feel your loved one in your heart and you remember them and you do things to honor them, then they never leave you. They never leave you.
Right. That's so beautiful. And yeah, you get to believe however you want to believe, but you also get to grieve however you want to grieve. And we can make that choice to grieve in a way that does not serve us and our life right now, or we can grieve in a way that not only serves you, but I imagine your mom would be smiling so hard right now to see the way that you've kind of gone through this and the way that you're approaching it right now. I just think that's so beautiful. I think like this is a good closing. I don't like for this interview, like, I just want to sit with that. And I hope that Careblazers have stayed for this whole interview, because at some point they will find themselves where you are, where that loved one is no longer physically here. And how do you want to go through that process? Some days are going to be harder than others, and some days might not be so great, but it's just this idea of, I'm going to go through this believing like my loved one is with me now more than ever.
Yeah. And it's so important to just give yourself that grace to go through it how you need to, as slowly as you do, and to know that it's not linear. You don't go from point A to point B to point. It's up and down, it's back and forth, it's all over the place. And you don't go through the stages of grief. You just sort of cycle and circle through them. And I might be feeling great about it today, and then tomorrow I might be a pile of tears all day. And that's okay, because it's okay. It's your grief. You get to decide how you want to do it. And it's never going to go away. But for me, it went from being all day, every day, to being just kind of there in the background, a part of my day, a part of me, a part of who I am now. But it's not all consuming like it was in the beginning. And there are days when it is all consuming. So it's just important to just, grief is love. Grief is just, it's honoring your love for your person that you lost.
Absolutely.
And that's all, that's all it is. And that's all it means. And you shouldn't run from it. You should just feel it and be in it, because it's a beautiful reminder of your love for the person you lost. And just give yourself grace and get through it as you need to, because only you can decide how to move through that.
Absolutely. I always say grief is the price you pay to love.
Yes.
And most people, I imagine, would not choose to give up the love to avoid the grief. They would still choose the love of that person, loving that person, having that person in their life, even knowing the intense grief that it's going to cause when they're gone. Like that's just the currency. And most people are willing to pay that price, even though it hurts, and that's okay.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Lauren, thank you so much for taking your time with us today. Careblazers, I'm going to link her book, Weathering the Storm, below in the description. I'll also be sure to let all of you know when her second book is out so that you can order that one as well. I also have a couple of videos on grief that I'll link below just in case you want to take this a little bit further. And I hope, my wish for all of you is that you all find a Saint Sheila in your life, that you all learn a little bit about how Lauren's family welcomed care in the home, and that you can maybe try to borrow this idea that your loved one is still with you more than ever, and you can still have a wonderful, beautiful, growing relationship with your loved one, even when they are physically no longer here. I think that's really important and beautiful. So Lauren, thank you so much for sharing that. Is there anything else you'd like to say to Careblazers before we end today?
Just if they want to read more of my story and follow along with me now as I am moving forward, they can follow me at Life, Love, and Alzheimer's on Facebook and Instagram. And then my blog is lifeloveandalzheimers.com as well, where they can sign up for my mailing list and read everything and continue to follow along as I continue to share my story.
That's wonderful. And Careblazers, I'll be sure to link her Facebook, Instagram, blog, all of that will be in the description below to this video. So just click on that and all of the links will be there for you. All right, Lauren, thank you so much for sharing your journey. You've been such a beautiful gift to my Careblazer audience. I know a lot of people are going to get a lot out of this. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Careblazer, I hope you really enjoyed that interview. I always enjoy talking with Lauren. She's just one of the most real, open people that I've met when it comes to opening up about something so sensitive and emotional. So I hope that you can leave a comment below the video for her, giving her some thanks for sharing her story with all of us. I'll be back next week with a new video. If you haven't already, click the red subscribe button on your screen. That'll make it so that other Careblazers out there in the world will be able to find this channel. Thank you so much. Bye.